The art of the deal is an extraordinarily difficult skill to master. One can know all the basic, sound, fundamental economic principles like the back of their hand. But when it comes to a negotiation, it's an entirely different ballgame. And in light of the new Chase and Tee Higgins contracts, the Cincinnati Bengals got their guys back, but they may have made a costly mistake in doing so. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and today we are talking about the Cincinnati Bengals and the art of the deal. Now, first to begin, we must contextualize what is this art of the deal. And this is a phrase that was popularized by our current president in a book that he wrote that was part memoir and part business oriented in relation to his business endeavors. And what it comes down to is that the key to success comes in the form of deal making, and that they are an art form. And one of the best strategies for deal making is leveraging your negotiations. Strategically using your strength and your resources to gain influence and achieve a better outcome in your negotiation. Ultimately, swaying the other party to at least give in a little bit to the influence that you have. And for the Cincinnati Bengals, this is where they failed. Because for Chase and for Tee Higgins, these are two very obviously talented wide receivers. Chase just won the Triple Crown, is one of, if not the best wide receiver in the entire NFL. And when it comes to a number two option, there aren't many better than Tee Higgins. So these two guys, they know that there is a major market out there for them. And they know both their star power on and off the field. As a result of that, they want the big money, and rightfully so. But as an organization, the Cincinnati Bengals have fundamental leverage because of their positioning. Chase and Tee Higgins, they play for the Bengals and are under contract with the Bengals, at least for a time, because ultimately contracts come to an end. And when that happens, you don't have that fundamental leverage anymore. You are not the one putting a roof through your training facilities and your stadium over the heads of your wide receivers. Rather, the leverage shifts a little bit. And all of a sudden, Chase and Tee Higgins, they have a little bit more power. But if you're the Bengals, you still have one major factor, and that is Joe Burrow. Because if there was one constant for the Cincinnati Bengals last year, it was their offense, and that was led by star quarterback Joe Burrow, who was in MVP conversations despite missing the playoffs. 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, a sky-high completion percentage, a without a doubt top 5 quarterback in the entirety of the NFL. And among that list, you've also got a Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, but Joe Burrow, while Allen and Jackson have struggled to topple the Kansas City Chiefs come playoff time, Joe Burrow proved that he can at least get you to a Super Bowl. So he has one thing that number 8 and number 17, they don't. And if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow gives you a lot of power, because you go to a new team as a wide receiver, there's no guarantee that that quarterback is going to be able to feed you the ball to the extent that Burrow does. In fact, there's almost a guarantee of the opposite. And if you're a star wide receiver, yes, you want your money. But even in that instance of financials coming first, who's going to make your production look better? Joe Burrow or a borderline starting quarterback who a team might be non-committal to and might be a one-year rental? Who do you trust more to make your stats look better so you can get that money? And then, of course, there's the instance of winning. You have a better shot with Joe Burrow in the offense if the Bengals can iron out their defensive issues than you do taking a chance with a new team and having to develop chemistry and having plenty of added question marks. So ultimately, if you're Chase or you're Higgins, the Bengals had one thing over you in these contract negotiations, and it couldn't be the roof they were holding over your head anymore. No, it was Joe Burrow. And when you've got a quarterback like that, that can make you look as good as Chase looked last year, and who, in the right circumstances, has the ability to lead your team to a Super Bowl. Ultimately, it's not crazy to imagine a wide receiver seeing that and taking a little bit of a pay cut, still being very highly paid, but not worried about the margins of a couple million more if it means that they can stay with a team that has major offensive firepower and just needs to figure out their defense, and all of a sudden they're a Super Bowl contender. But that's not what happened. Instead, Chase and Tee Higgins, they got big contracts. And that comes down to a fundamental flaw in the Bengals front office and what made them ultimately lose all of their leverage. And that is by speaking openly about negotiations and their goals for these negotiations with their wide receivers. Now, these two were always going to demand sizable extensions. But the Bengals general manager, he backed himself into a corner. Because if there's one thing you don't do in the battle for leverage, you do not negotiate in public. Because once it's out there, it's not coming back. And more often than not, one is going to be held to their word and have to be accountable for everything that they said. And when asked about how the Bengals were going to deal with the extensions, the general manager said, Jamar is always going to be our priority. He's a fantastic football player. He's going to end up being the number one paid non-quarterback in the league. We're there. Let's get it done. End quote. And at the time, that statement was already a little bit out there, but it seemed reasonable. This was your Triple Crown winner. And you take a look at what other top wide receivers are getting paid, maybe it's not that crazy. But by putting that out there in the open, you leave yourself very little wiggle room if the market gets reset. And that's precisely what happened. Because since that February statement, the market for the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, that has been reset not once, but twice. First by Max Crosby at $35.5 million per year, and then Myles Garrett at $40 million per year. And all of a sudden, any power you had over Jamar Chase, that was gone. Because you told the public that he was going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the entirety of the NFL. And now all of a sudden, the contract negotiations, the floor for them start at $40 million. And as a general manager, you have to do all that you can to get these wide receivers back, especially with how offensive oriented your team is. Especially with the idea in mind of maximizing Joe Burrow while you have him. Because a franchise quarterback doesn't come around every couple of decades. But with one statement, the Bengals general manager collapsed all of his leverage. And when it comes to negotiations, you have to establish that leverage and set forth a precedent for yourself in regards to the weight of your influence. And that is the art of the deal. So whilst it might be a positive, it absolutely is a positive that the Bengals brought these two back. They made a costly mistake in the process of deal making. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very much for listening. I had a Celtics video that was going to come out today, but with these two contracts, I had to put something out there. I hope this was an enjoyable through line of reasoning about the state of contract negotiations and one costly mistake from the Bengals GM. I quite enjoyed it. That Celtics thing's probably going to actually get pushed back to Friday, talking about Austin Reeves on Wednesday. He's been incredible recently. So that's stuff to look forward to if you're a returning subscriber. If you're a new one, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you made it this far. Hope it was enjoyable. That's all for today's episode of State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Thank you very much for listening. This is the Cincinnati Bengals in the art of the deal.